Welcome back for all of our listeners. And if you're new here, hello, I'm Kimberly, your host, and this is The Parent Solution, your one-stop shop for all things educational. Today, I have a guest, Brandon, with me, Brandon Hendrickson, and I'm really excited to be introducing him because he's got some wild things in the works, some definitely original things that have not really been heard of or approached in this way before. Brandon, happy to have you here.
Hello, a pleasure to be had.
Why don't you start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Oh, goodness. So I am the current founder. I guess one is sort of the perpetual founder of the company Science is Weird. It's scienceisweird.com, where we're sort of spearheading this effort to remake the science curriculum from the ground up, based on what we actually understand of science these days, because the science curriculum that people tend to get is sort of mired in these assumptions about what was known and what is talk aboutable from about 1900, 1930, something like that. And also based on what we understand that kids can actually understand, because it turns out that a lot of the topics that we talk about in the science curriculum, K through 12, sort of assume that kids are dense, that kids are dim, that kids are sort of lesser than other species of humans. But it turns out that that's not entirely true. And so we have decided that what we want to hit is the remaking of the science curriculum around the ideas that the world is actually mysterious, but also that wonderful things are known, and that kids, when you understand how kids actually understand information, are smart enough to really profoundly understand it. Before this, this has been in the works for a very long time and have been working hardcore on it for a few years. But before that, I was I taught humanities seminars at private schools and in the homeschool community, and then had a good number of years teaching the SAT and being a very sort of a high-end tutor.
Very nice. Very nice. I know that the SATs are a certain, they're definitely, you're right there. It's a high end sort of knowledge spectrum, I think, that you're appealing to there for the SATs or the ACTs or what have you. Okay, so I mean, I love this thing that you're starting, this project with Science is Weird. I think that's really, really amazing, and I think that's very much needed. Because I think that with science, I know that with science, you're right. The way that we look at science in the public education system is kind of that there are certain things that you don't question, and certain things that are made into facts when really they are theories. So I think that's a very cool approach and a very needed approach, a very creative approach to what Science is Weird is really about. And so where does that project kind of sit as of this point for this podcast?
We are just about to begin our third full year of making curriculum, do live classes for students across the world, and then also have some other lessons that kids can download or stream more or less whenever they want. Really excited. The topic, in just one lesson a week, kids are going to this year tackle some of the profound science behind black holes, and then behind weather patterns, then chocolate, where we'll actually be having them make their own chocolate in sort of the historical order that people deciphered how to figure out chocolate is made, and then learn the biochemistry of that. And then we're going to do teeth, mostly the evolutionary history of teeth, but also, frankly, some things that scientists are all pretty much agreed on, that the American Dental Association kind of doesn't want. Oh my gosh, I sound like a conspiracy theorist. I promise I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I actually have a whole lesson for kids on how to avoid conspiracy theories. But in the case of very entrenched interest groups, there actually are some basic scientific things that it is not beneficial for certain political groups that you understand about how teeth work. And frankly, at this point, like, we should be able to get rid of cavities entirely using, medicine that was come up with like 50 years ago. But it's interesting that we haven't. And then finally going to capstone the whole year on the sociobiology of dogs, which I'm really looking forward to.
Oh, that's exciting. I love the fact that you use the term conspiracy theorist. I always make the joke. I say, what is the difference between a conspiracy theorist and the truth? And
What is the difference
it's
between
a
a conspiracy
joke.
theorist
It's a
and the truth?
joke, but the answer is about 6 to 12 months. And in some cases, because when you think about it, conspiracy theories is a derogatory term, I think, that's used for things that are outside of the mainstream narrative, so to speak, right? Outside of the mainstream information, if you want to call it that. And so and so I think that the term conspiracy theorist, just because you are presenting alternative information, doesn't necessarily mean it's a conspiracy theory or that you are a conspiracy theorist. In the case of dentistry, like you're pointing out, right? Like they should have had something to fix cavities, 50 years ago. They probably do have such a thing, but you have to look at the motives behind why that's not been made readily available or why that's not been something that's knowledgeable, right? I know that there's a saying, it says a patient cured is a client lost. And I really think that holds true very much for the pharmaceutical industry and the healthcare industry and all that stuff when you talk about pharmaceutical and natural medicine and the difference between the two. But that's a subject for a different podcast.
It's an interesting, well, but I think that teaching kids how to avoid falling into conspiracy theories is actually one of the most important things that we can help our kids do. I'll never forget, I used to run this this weekend humanities science seminar my wife and I did in our apartment in Seattle. And I once had the student, he was, I don't know, 9 years old maybe. And he was unspeakably brilliant, and he was creative, and he was thoughtful, and he was so invested in the conspiracy theory of the Illuminati, that a small number of people, across the royal families of Europe was secretly pulling the strings of all world affairs, because he had run into this on a YouTube channel some years before, and the algorithm had done the thing that the algorithm will do, and it gave him more of the things that he liked, and it took him down this rabbit trail. And he, at this point, this is many years later now, his mind is still, I will say, polluted with this really difficult to get out of mind virus. So helping kids learn how to stay inside of, this sort of consensual reality of like, what is the scientific establishment telling us? What are the best economists, right, whatever, telling us about the way that the world actually works? They're not always going to be right, but they're going to be right a heck of a lot more frequently than, conspiracy theories are going to be right. It's helpful to just start from this platform of like what the sensible experts are able to agree on. And for my science teaching, because science can get so political, I just always limit myself to teaching, what is the thing that virtually all scientists are virtually positive on. And that does still get sometimes quite political and sometimes challenging for a lot of people, which is obviously fantastic, because go science.
I think the important thing, and what I love about Science is Weird, is that you can encourage kids to, regardless of their belief system, you can encourage kids to think critically about what these sorts of narratives or ideas or whatever. You can encourage them to think critically about where they come from, and what it is that they are doing, right? And sometimes asking that question can be really difficult, and asking those questions can be really difficult. I have adopted the mindset that it is always important to stay open to new information, because for myself, and you would know this, science is always changing, right? We're always finding out new things. We're always like developing new things. We're always researching new things, right? New information comes to light. When you think about the universe as the universe and how small we as humans actually are, do we really know anything and everything, right? Do we really know everything? And then the question becomes, do we know anything, right? So I think for myself, that's the mindset that I come at it with, that I always want to be open to new information, and I always want to be open to, however wild it may sound, I always want to be open to that idea of there's something different, even if it's just that I am aware of what it is, right? There's nothing wrong. I don't think that there's anything wrong with the gaining of knowledge in the sense of knowing what the different theories are and knowing what those different sorts of things can lead to, like you said.
There's, in fact, a really fantastic book on the philosophy of science
Mm-hmm.
Possibly we're getting into the weeds here, but I'll bring it up because I think it touches on exactly what you were saying and lauding, called The Knowledge Machine by, I forget the author's name. But fantastic book that tries to tackle the question, why is it that science actually seems to succeed at getting knowledge at, orders of magnitude more quickly, and
Mm-hmm.
more sort of dependably and historically than other institutions have been able to do. And what is it about the specific milieu, there's a fun word, in which science first arose in, certain countries in Europe, a few centuries ago that did that? And the hypothesis that he has is that when you actually understand how science works, you understand it makes sense where it came from, and we can understand how to do it better. And he said the thing that is beautiful about science is that it has this way of, on the one hand, coming up with rules for scientists to fight with their ideas, to convince one another, where they have to play fair. Not that you don't have scientific cheats all the time, but they have to play fair and convince each other with actual predictions and data. But on the other hand, it does not say, what a lot of people sort of assumes that it says, that the scientists are only allowed to believe the things that they can only prove with data. It
Mm-hmm.
turns out that one of the greatest engines for scientific discovery is truly insane beliefs that scientists themselves often hold, that they do
Mm-hmm.
not write about in peer-reviewed journal articles or whatever, but they believe it, and they can write about it in their own books that they sell to the public. It's that confluence of crazy ideas
Mm-hmm.
added to, or I guess put through the strainer of, but no, really, what can you prove? That has
Mm-hmm.
given us so many out-of-the-box scientific ideas that at first sounded insane and then later end up being demonstrated to be the most dependable models that we have. And this is
Mm-hmm.
something that, like, Europe 400 years ago was really good at, that the world now is actually not as good at. People want
Mm-hmm.
to go into either being like, you can't tell me what to believe, or into like, I can only believe the things that are told to me.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually part of what we're kind of going for with Science is Weird. We see that kind of long term, if you look at the history of innovation, the rate of innovation is going. It's not that it's going down, it's that it's continuing to go up, but we need orders of magnitude, to keep using that phrase, more people to throw into the gears of science to get the
Mm-hmm.
same amount of innovation that we used to get hundreds of years ago really, really easily. There are lots
Right.
of different reasons for this. But but if we want to try to improve this, or even like just keep treading water, we're going to need a generation of kids, well, a generation of adults who are able to think out of the box and who are able to draw upon the greatest things that have ever been figured out across the scientific and beyond disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
And the science curriculum as is truly not set up to deliver that. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is my dream, right?
Yeah.
Is to help connect with enough families who have kids who are just hungry to understand the oddities of reality,
Mm-hmm.
that I can help connect them with the best science and understanding it in ways that fit into their head, that then they can use to see the world in, and they can use to connect new ideas together that nobody is connecting, at least that not that many people are connecting together, and we can actually continue forward this whole epic cause of making the world a grander place through figuring out how it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's definitely a grand mission. I don't know, I don't know myself that is something that is possible within the current realm of where we live, because you're right. People, 400 years ago, you're right, there was a greater innovation rate, so to speak, right? And if we're going to get anywhere, quote unquote, get anywhere with these scientific ideas and with proving what's true, what's false, what is reality, what's not, you have to have, no doubt, a greater amount of people that are looking for those answers and that are searching for those answers and that are researching and exploring and figuring out what is not what is the consensus, but what is the truth. And I think that truth, this is a different sort of podcast topic, but I think that truth and the subjectivity of truth is definitely something that is a bit of a touchy topic, because there's always three sides to every story, right? There's version one, version two, and then there's the truth. And so the question then becomes kind of like, whose perspective are we going with in terms of truth? But I think that the idea that is behind Science is Weird, of encouraging kids to explore and encouraging them to think outside of the box and have those sorts of critical thinking questions, I love that, because that's what I stand for in my business, is making sure that kids are able to ask those questions that other children wouldn't necessarily think of, right? Or dare to ask or dare to bring up. So I really admire that. That's awesome. It's so good to hear.
Well, here's what I'll say, that I actually feel fairly optimistic on this, even if, right, like I have a master's degree in educational leadership, and I know, how difficult it is to make change to very large institutions. But I'm really heartened by the expansion of all things in the world, YouTube. YouTube, I think, has in the last 5 or 6 years become the world's truly greatest science teacher, where you can go on YouTube and you can get all sorts of garbage that will just do you wrong for the whole rest of your life. But if you know what channels to follow, to, like, subscribe to, whatever, and you watch their videos, you train the algorithm by giving the thumbs up and the thumbs down to give you more of the same. There are a really large number of profoundly great science educators who are not only providing information that is, as trustworthy as you get in a really good science textbook, or approximately as trustworthy as that, but who are also explaining it in a way that makes it much easier to understand this information. Mm-hmm. And crucially, that does it so fun. It does it in a way that actually connects emotions to cognition and makes kids hungry to learn more. I'm actually working on an essay right now that I'll be publishing on my website at some point in the relatively near future, of how you can specifically turn your YouTube feed into a utterly fantastic science teacher that is customized to give you or your kids exactly the sort of science that they're most interested in, that will most expand their imagination and their sense of the edge, even like where the edge of science even currently is, to help them imagine where could they go, what could they do later on in life.
And that's really what it's all about, right? You want to encourage that drive for learning from a very young age. I think that's the most important thing, to encourage that inspiration for learning, that drive for learning, and that desire to want to know why all the time. And I think science in particular is always asking the question why. It's always asking the question, why is it that way, right? And if it's not asking that question, and that why question has, been answered by somebody or whatever, okay, are there alternative perspectives that we're looking at? Are there different things that we can explore within that realm, right? And that's very dependent on a child's interests, and what they want to be able to learn. But I think that's a very important thing to encourage in children from a young age, because that's going to carry them well in the future as an adult.
I remember being really confused when I was getting my degree in what essentially ended up being like an educational theory master's degree. In the, I can't say absolute absence of this topic from what we were talking about, but the almost absolute absence of any sense of what is it that children want. What is their desire, and how can we tap into that desire? There is, to my mind, only one truly good, and he's amazing, theorist in educational theory of understanding how to tap into the things that kids really crave, and how to then connect almost any topic to give them those things. That theorist, by the way, is Kieran Egan. He just died earlier this year. Almost nobody, a lot of people know about him. No one, not nearly enough people understand his work. His Wikipedia page is now good. But if you go to my website and then type /Egan, Egan, I wrote kind of an introduction to Egan's thought that anybody can read.
Cool. Very cool. You mentioned that you were doing you said your educational master's degree?
Yes, yeah.
And so was that, and I'm asking because you mentioned that you do tutoring, or that you did at one point do tutoring for ADHD kids with the ACTs or the SATs. Did that sort of degree help you at all? Did that further, is that connected to your desire to tutor for this high class sort of or high demand sort of subject?
Yeah. I would say that my master's degree in educational leadership from a very well-regarded program in the subject was approximately of zero value, except for the tens of thousands of dollars that it cost me in the years of my life that it cost
So a
me.
negative
It was
value.
actually, yeah, I would actually say that it was so bad that I will not name the institution that I took it from. But yeah, right now, but I will say that I would tell anybody be very careful before going into an education master's program. I'm not sure that I know one that is actually worth it at this time. If you do, feel free to say that.
That is definitely something that I can agree with you on. I am all about, like you have to have the proper credentials for things if you're doing things or you're running things or whatever. Because you want to be able to prove that you have the knowledge behind what you're doing, right? I don't want a tradesman to come to my house and not have some sort of like knowledge or apprenticeship or something that's proven that he has the experience to be able to do that. The same thing as I wouldn't want somebody who is who doesn't have a high school degree or a high school education or whatnot, like teaching my child English or teaching my child math or whatever, right? If you've not proven yourself at some point within the education system, it becomes very difficult for me personally to be able to trust you. Now, that being said, paper's not everything. Paper is not everything, because the degrees that I have behind my name are not something that I use. They're something that I use knowledge wise, but they're not something that I use in actual teaching. Right? Teachers college that I went to didn't actually teach me hardly anything about how to teach. That sort of experience and that sort of knowledge I got from being in my placement. I had
Yeah.
fantastic placement teachers, no complaints there. I was very lucky, because I know some people who were not as lucky with their placement teachers. But the point, I digress here. The point is that paper is important for sure, but as is your case as well, it's not necessarily worth anything if you don't have the knowledge or know what to do with it, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to recognize that not all degrees are equal, right?
Created
I, I
equal.
mean, I have, I have a degree in history, and I think that the bachelor's degree in that degree, I think I actually amassed a body of understanding that I use on a daily
Hmm.
basis still. That I think that actually means something. I have another bachelor's degree in world religions, religious studies, and like yeah, like that to a slightly lesser extent, but like it was a real degree that I
Hmm.
that made me wiser and more thoughtful and blah blah blah. Kind of an expert on things,
Hmm.
and education is just not is by and large not a topic that that is a field that has sort of agreement and it's not a discipline in the same way that the other ones are. Simon Fraser University. Let me go back for a second and say that if I had to recommend that somebody go to a university for a teaching degree, I would actually recommend Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. I'll say that, and we can move on to another topic. Sorry, my friends at SFU. I actually do think that the work that you're doing is game changing.
Good to know. Good to know. I'll definitely I'll keep that recommendation in mind should anybody ask me. I think yeah, I think that yeah, they are worth something, but I don't think that they're everything, so to speak. Um so your experience with tutoring with children or with I guess with young adults for the SATs. Now you said that you specifically specialized in tutoring for ADHD children. Is
Oh,
there
that's right. That's
something?
what your original question was about, wasn't it? I'm sorry,
Yeah,
ADHD
yeah. No,
moment
no,
here.
no problem. That was originally what you were talking about in terms of being able to tutor kids with ADHD. What was your experience like doing that?
I mean, wonderful. I loved it. I don't do it anymore just because I'm focusing entirely on science is weird. But I mean, just so first of all, I should say that I have ADHD. Both of my two kids are very, very, very severe ADHD. And even before I focused explicitly on working with ADHD kids on the SAT and ACT and other standardized tests, I have been just sort of, those are the kids that gravitated to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a wonderful challenge. Those tests, just from a teaching perspective, those tests are such a wonderful experience, or rather they can be, because there's actually frequently there's a desire from the student to actually do better,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we can say like the tests are crap or the tests are great or whatever, right? Those are that kind of question is a different thing. I have complicated views on all of that, but it's not always the case that the kid, when you're working with a kid, wants to actually improve at the thing that you're working with. Their parent
Mm-hmm.
wants them to improve, right? But with the SAT, like they got skin in the game for the whole thing. And it's really hard to improve. And you can see when the improvement is happening and when the improvement is not happening, because there are numbers that come from all of all of it. And it's really, really difficult. And
Mm-hmm.
so to actually take on the challenge of helping somebody, like substantially get better at reading or writing or math in a
Mm-hmm.
relatively short period of time is the sort of thing that everybody says that they can do, because why else would they be in it if they didn't say that? And it turns out is fiendishly difficult. So doing that then with students who have ADHD is even harder. And I will say that I am an SAT coaching heretic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in that, like I side with that perspective, that channel of research, and there have been many, many, many not just studies but meta-analyses
Mm-hmm.
looking at how well test prep works. And what the great majority of them, with some interesting exceptions, show is that it mostly doesn't work. I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get your podcast in trouble, but there was a very large test prep company that if I said it, everybody know what I'm talking about, that used to say, you will improve your score 200 points or your money back. And then when this research began to come out, they had to rescind this
Mm-hmm.
because it was no longer believable. The Wall Street Journal had a good article a few years ago, a front page or something like that, like looking at like the politics of like how when we learned that SAT and ACT prep mostly doesn't work, like what do we do with that? But what I
Mm-hmm.
found is that like most of what people are, hawking in education in general doesn't doesn't really work, or it doesn't work very well, or it doesn't work, it works for this kid but not for that kid.
Mm-hmm.
But there really are like a few things, that a few basic ideas in education that not very many people are doing, that we really can hang our hats on. They're dependable, and more than that, we can like heavily and we can throw ourselves into, and we can get all sorts of exciting results if we just go deep, go hard, go all in on some
Mm-hmm.
of those things. One of them is spaced repetition. Do you know about spaced repetition?
I do, yes, but how about you
Yeah,
explain
yeah.
to our viewers what spaced repetition is? I was lucky enough to
What
attend your
what an
seminar.
excellent interviewing technique. Yes, thank you very much. So, like 100, almost 30 years ago now, there was this German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus, 1885, wrote this book called On Memory, something else in German, where he was the first person to say, what when people learn things, how long do they remember them? And he
Mm-hmm.
came up with these like sort of ingenious, weird whack-a-mole tests to actually like test himself, test other people for this. He got all these numbers, and what he found is that most of the things that people learned, they forgot like literally almost the next day, which almost sounds like it's too bad to be true until like you think back on so many math classes and so many science classes and whatever that you took in high school or college, where you worked your butt off to learn something, and then the test was the next day and you did it, and then like a week later, did you remember the things? Maybe like half of them, and that's pretty good because you worked your butt off to learn those things, right? You learn those things really deeply. But like even a week or a month later, So many of them are gone. It is as if, I mean, right, people attribute this quote to William Butler Yeats, but it's actually a modification of an ancient Roman. But Yeats is supposed to have said education is not the lighting, no, sorry, education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire, which sounds really great. And I am all for setting kids' minds on fire in some sort of metaphorical sense. But fire needs fuel. If kids are going to be interested in things, if kids are going to see themselves as the inheritors of all the people who have come before them, who have figured out amazing things and take up the mantle of figuring out new and even more exciting things, they need to actually have this content, this understanding of the world. If they want to be super creative, they actually need to know stuff. And so it's like education is this lighting of fuel in a pail. Okay, is that metaphor? This is a weird metaphor that I'm using right now. But it's like the pail has a big old hole in the bottom of it, and you keep filling up the pail, and it keeps sliding on down and falling out, and whatever else fuel. Is this solid fuel? Is this liquid? I don't even know. The fuel is going away, and so this psychologist Herman Ebbinghaus figured out that okay, like this is bad. People, like the house is on fire. Teachers, the school is on fire. The things that we're teaching, they are being forgotten very quickly. How can we fix that? And he also figured out the answer. The answer is the name that goes under spaced repetition. The idea is that you the things that you learn, you should review. Okay, that sounds so obvious as to not be worth mentioning, but the intriguing thing is that it's a specific kind of review, specifically at a certain kind of schedule. I'm about to make this way overly simple, but the things that you learn, you should review them the next day. And then you should review them 2 days later, and then 4 days later, and then a week later, and then 2 weeks, and then a month, then 2 months, then 4 months, then 8 months, then a year and a half, then 3 years, then 6 years. And you're like, what is going on here? Here's the beautiful thing. If you religiously follow this, you will find in like the last, 13 or something years of my life has been like nothing but an experiment, a giant experiment in doing this. You will find that you magically remember almost all of the things that you learn. This has been known for almost 130 years now. And for like 129 years, psychologists have been writing articles that are like, hey, teachers, you should do this. Why don't you do this? Wouldn't this be cool if you did this? So one of the things, oh my gosh, we're talking about the SAT, right? So one of the things that I found in doing SAT prep with kids is that if you take this seriously, you can apply it to math, you can apply it to writing, you can apply it to reading in different ways, in different kind of creative ways for each of those things.
Yeah.
And everything that the kids learn, they can lock into the memory. In fact, even more than that, the math problems, for example, that they learn it, they work hard on it. The next day, they're about to forget it. They redo it. However, the second time that they do it, it's not the same as the first time. It's never the same. They do it a bit faster. The next time they do it, it's really fast. The next time they do it, they can like close their eyes and they can do it. The next time they do it, they realize they've been idiots all along. Because the entire way that they've been doing it, it's been like, okay, like do this step, this step, this step, this step, this step, okay, now it's done. And it's like only like the sixth or whatever time that they look at it, that they see the problem from this totally different vantage point, and they go, oh my gosh, all you have to do is this simple thing, because this entire thing that I thought was a bunch of things is just one thing. When I used to lead kids, and I'm actually thinking of doing like just like a class of this year, like meeting once a week where I just like guide a bunch of kids through this, picking one ridiculously hard problem every week. When I guide kids through doing this, they regularly have these like moments where, it's like it's been cloudy for 12 months and then like the clouds part and the shaft of sunlight hits you and only you, and you feel like the universe makes sense. And when I was doing this study for my GRE, I did this a lot, and I had that experience of ye gods, maybe like every few days, and I think I maybe had that experience 3 or 4 times in my entire life before that. So when you just go all in on an idea like forgetting curves, oh my gosh, the things that you can do.
before I had met you and attended your seminar, I kind of attributed that automatically just because that's how I know kids learn best is by review, right? And certain
Yeah.
regular repetitions. But I wasn't as familiar with like I guess you could call it the rule of doubling. Like we were saying,
Yeah.
like every day or like at the day after, and then 2 days after, and then 4 days, and it just doubles from there, right? And then once a week, and then once every 2 weeks, and it just keeps going. So, I mean, I thank you for opening my eyes to that sort of pattern because I think that's very useful. And I think it's awesome that that's what you are trying to do and that worked so well for you with this test prep with the SATs and the ACTs and PSATs and whatever else for tutoring because I know ADHD is really something that people want to be able to help and that teachers in particular want to be able to do and to approach right with a method that actually works and makes sense.
I will say that one of the big things, I feel funny because like my whole sort of song and dance is that ADHD really does suck. In fact, it sucks a lot more than a lot of people think. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
this tendency to say, oh, like ADHD is like my superpower. Okay, fine. But also like those of us who have ADHD, this is one study that I'm citing. It was presented a few years ago at the, I don't know, like an international ADHD conference or something like that. But those of us with ADHD on average die like a decade earlier than other people. Like the ADHD people are my people, and it sucks.
Yeah.
But it also kind of can be a superpower when you know how to lean into it. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the beautiful
If
things
you
about
use it
having
as
ADHD,
such. Yeah. If you use it as
yeah,
such.
well, it's recognize. I mean, among other things, it's recognizing that in order for something to sort of cross that threshold of being meaningful and interesting to you, it has to, pack a wallop.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I teach kids, which is to say all the time, like what I do is I find wallops, and so to turn the
Mm-hmm.
science curriculum into just like a whole series of insights that turn, your whole view of the part of the world totally upside down,
Mm-hmm.
and to find books and videos and all sorts of materials that actually like connect with people emotionally, that makes like their eyes go wide and make
Mm-hmm.
them keep wanting more.
It's that moment that like aha like wait a minute what am I being presented with, right? And I really find within my own experience that you call them wallops. I like that term, that finding those wallops to really engage kids is a really smart idea because a lot of them will pay attention if they're interested or engaged or they want to know something, right? And it's inspiring that drive. And that's a sneaky way of doing it. It's a great way of doing it, but it's a sneaky way of doing it, of finding something that is so that you can't help but want to know more, right? And find out
Yeah.
more. And I think that automatically sort of encourages that drive for learning and that inspiration to always know more.
Well, it's funny because like the irony of the whole thing is that this is what largely drove the science that we have, right? Scientists aren't in it for the money because they can't be, because there's not that much money actually doing like fundamental basic research. They're in it for those moments of, oh my, right? And so when we frame science in particular like that, in different ways, literature, in different ways, math, in different ways, whatever, we're actually like doing a service to what that discipline is supposed to be. I feel like sometimes I've heard, I don't know, teacher training programs like talk about like the idea of, oh, make it more emotional, make it more exciting. Is this, sort of like this excitement that we're trying to bring or foist upon the curriculum. But like when you actually look at the things that we're asking kids to learn, it's a bunch of really great crap. It's like the best crap that we could possibly be. The base, the roots of the curriculum, when it comes down to the content that we say from K through 12 that we want kids to learn, is actually some really great content. I have my qualms with certain aspects of the curriculum, but no, it's really wonderful, and it's more than a treat. It's an honor to get to lead kids through discovering how meaningful these disciplines can possibly be.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brennan, for sharing your insights and all of your ideas and your great visionary concepts. I love what you're doing. I really think it's important, like I said, to encourage that drive for learning and encourage that inspiration and that curiosity in kids. And I think that's really a great thing. And it's great to see it happening in the science field as well, because I know that it doesn't often get to that point of happening in the science field. So thank you for your work. It's awesome to see.
Thank you for your work, and what a wonderful interview.
If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out. You can always find me on social media. It's Star Students on Facebook and LinkedIn, or starstudents.learning on Instagram. You can also reach out through email, which is all over social media channels. Thank you, as always, so much for listening, and I'll be back next week.